really wonderful to be able to join together online and in person to celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This year. I want to start by thanking Kayla Johnson and Dr. Dwight Radcliffe for their visionary leadership in setting up this panel discussion. So let's thank God for them. And I want to begin, before we get to our panel, I wanted to introduce this topic that has been chosen, Children of the Disinherited. And this title is actually inspired by a book from Howard Thurman entitled Jesus and the Disinherited. And among other things, Thurman's book really reintroduces us to Jesus as one who was in solidarity with all the disinherited peoples of the earth. Not just the Black peoples of the earth, but all the disinherited peoples of the earth. And he goes on to talk about the hounds of hell, fear, deception, and hatred which dog the steps of the disinherited, and invites them into the love ethic of Jesus as a way of reclaiming their dignity, their personhood, and their worth in a world that dehumanizes them. Now, an important and overlooked aspect of this book is Thurman's attention to children and youth. As Reverend Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas notes in the new foreword to the book, quote, "The book provides a message to Black children on how to thrive and flourish in a world that attempts to destroy their humanity from the inside out." And personally, for me, in revisiting the book yet again, I was struck by how clearly this theme resounds throughout Thurman's message. For one, the book is dedicated to Thurman's children. The dedication reads, "To my beloved daughters, Olive and Anne, and to the future of their generation in whom the struggles of the past will find fulfillment." And then the second way you see this theme in the book is that the book really emerges out of Thurman's own childhood experiences. For example, the book has many echoes of Thurman's first and most significant theological guide, his grandmother, Nancy Ambrose, who was formerly enslaved. To echo, Thurman actually says something that's quite striking. He says, "I learned more, quote, about the genius of the religion of Jesus from my grandmother than from all the men who taught me." To echo Kat Armas, we might say that Thurman was a strong advocate of Abuelita theology. That is, gleaning from the profound theological wisdom of the women of faith who go before us. Whether quoting his grandmother directly or not, her profound influence on his childhood is shown throughout the book. And then third, Thurman specifically addresses in the content of this work issues related to children and youth. And that brings us to the quote on which this session is based upon. And so let me put this quote in context. It comes from a discussion in which Thurman is talking about the power of fear in forming the life of people. He says that fear, quote, "becomes the safety device for the disinherited, with which they surround themselves in order to give some measure of protection from complete nervous collapse." Thurman speaks specifically of how the disinherited, quote, "make their bodies commit to memory, ways of behaving that will tend to reduce their exposure to violence." Just think about some of the conversations that Black and brown parents have to have with their children. And it's with this backdrop in mind that Thurman writes, quote, "Children are taught how to behave in this way. The children of the disinherited live a restricted childhood. From the earliest moments, they are conditioned so as to reduce their exposure to violence." With this quote in mind, I would like to turn to our panelists and invite each of them to briefly tell us a bit about who you are and how your work connects to this theme. And we'll actually start with Dr. Sarah Farmer.
Good afternoon. Sorry I can't be there with you in person, but my name is Sarah Farmer. I work actually at the Wabash Center for Teaching and Learning, and also adjunct for Fuller with their class on youth and culture. Prior to that, actually in July, I also worked as assistant professor at Indiana Wesleyan University. And so I come both as a scholar, as a practitioner, as a teacher. And so the connection to this kind of conversation as a scholar, my research has really focused on the concept of hope with communities that I would say are the disinherited, so many marginalized communities, particularly incarcerated populations, and that includes justice-involved youth. And then as a practitioner, for years, I worked with a Lilly-funded program called Youth Hope Builders Academy, where we would bring particularly Black youth in to talk about identity, faith formation, gaining a sense of belonging in a world that they had been disinherited from. I also founded a youth arts peace camp where we worked with young people in the inner city and tried to teach them conflict resolution skills and infuse it with the arts. And so, and currently I'm trying my hand at developing a parent-led youth ministry. So those are some of the ways that I engage young people previously and currently. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Farmer. And then we can go to Dr. Williams before coming to our panelists in person.
Yeah, thank you, Trey. I appreciate it. My name is Dr. Cedric Williams. I send you greetings all from a place called Normal, Illinois. So glad to be able to be joining you all from there. A little bit about me. I'm a licensed clinical and consulting psychologist, which really means that I engage in general applied psychology. So a lot of my work is working with people in applied practice. So thinking on the clinical side, doing psychotherapy, psychological testing. On the consulting side, meeting with teams, organizations, and individuals, talking about issues related to leader development and multicultural competence and inclusion. So I work with different organizations. My intersection with this conversation specifically about youth is really, I think that part of it is because of my own cultural identities of being a Black male who's lived in a very multicultural settings all my entire life. In addition to that, a lot of the consulting work that I do is with organizations or churches that are trying to have this conversation about the disinherited, have this conversation about Jesus and how it connects with cultural competence and understanding people in different ways. And so I'm grateful to be able to be here. In addition to my work in clinical and consulting, I am a professor, assistant professor at Fuller as well. So I'm the program director of the Doctorate of Marriage and Family Therapy. So yeah, I'm grateful to be here, grateful to join the conversation, and look forward to sharing, but also listening and learning. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And then we can go with you, Ahren.
Thanks, Trey. So excited to be here. My name is Ahren Martinez. I am currently the Associate Director of Children, Youth, and Family Programming at All Saints Church. Youth and the disinherited, in particular, marginalized communities, is my passion and my jam. And I also because I've been at All Saints now for a few months, but before then I was also here at Fuller, working for Fuller and Fuller Youth Institute. And I'm a graduate of Fuller. I got my MAICS here in Children at Risk emphasis. Thank you. And yeah, so I am just so passionate about working with youth and families and children, but also working with marginalized communities. And growing up as a young Black woman in America, I did not have, my drive is being the youth leader I did not have. As a young Black woman and in the church, I felt very disconnected, and I didn't have that person walking with me, giving me language for the experiences that I was having in my body as a young person, as a Black woman here in a land where our ancestors built this place for free. And I'm having all of these feelings and all the things, and I just, I want to be that person in that space for young people. To help them thrive, to give them language, to let them know that they're loved, to give them the resources they need, and just to know that that I'm there for them and all that they need. So that's my drive in this work, and that's my connection, and I'm grateful to be here with you guys.
Beautiful. Will?
Good afternoon. My name is Will Lewis. Before I tell you what I do, I will say, I want to say rather, growing up, my grandparents had this big long table where the adults ate. Every holiday, they had all the china, all of the nice things. And growing up, I always wanted to sit at the big table, but they would never let me at the big table. We sat at the other side of the kitchen with a little small table with the chairs that wasn't really good, the plastic chairs, same families, that. And it wasn't until I was 25 years old that I made it to the big table. Today, I am so grateful. Somehow, I have made it to the big table. And with that, I am Will Lewis from Fuller Youth Institute. I'm the marketing manager there. I have the awesome task, let me pause one more time. I am so grateful that many of our team members are here. All of our senior directors are here today for this work. My work intersects with this conversation. I've been a youth pastor for a very long time out of Chicago. I'm born and raised in Gary, Indiana. My church is in Chicago, now living in Dallas. And I have the awesome privilege to literally travel the country speaking to youth groups and working with youth groups. So I'm one of those individuals who have boots on the ground with young people a day. And with that, I'm so passionate about the future of the church, the future of where we as individuals, as Black and brown individuals, are placed in the church. Yeah, I'm super happy to be here and ready to go into this conversation.
Wonderful, wonderful. So to start, if we could just have a few of you talk about what does this term disinherited mean to you, and how do you see it manifesting with the young people you work with in your context?
I can start. I mean, when I think about disinherited, I'm thinking about people who have been robbed of what is rightfully theirs, which ultimately leaves them vulnerable, weak, and underprivileged, particularly by those who have power over them. And for BIPOC youth, I think that's particularly compounded by all kinds of racial disparities. And so when I think about how it manifests, particularly in this kind of post-pandemic, but this age of racial pandemic, I think young people have been robbed of a lot. They've been robbed of really basic things like graduation and being able to be at funerals, family members. But then they've also been robbed of things like safety on the streets. Like, I can't walk in this neighborhood freely because somebody might stop and, do something to me, to my physical body because of how I'm perceived, what they think about me. And so I think when I think about disinherited, I think about those as some of the examples that young people today are facing. And I think it moves into kind of mental health.
Yeah, I think Dr. Farmer said that so beautifully and so perfectly. And just to add on to what you said, yeah, the disinherited are the marginalized, the youth on the margins that don't have a voice, don't feel like they have a voice, don't have the resources in order to succeed, in order to get the education that they need, in order to get the food that they need. I think of food deserts and them not having access to food in order for them to thrive, in order for them to learn well, in order for them to sleep, like just basics, like their needs are not able to be met in that way. And that's what the disinherited experience on a daily basis. Yeah.
When I think of that, I think about Chicago, and I think about those individuals who live in the suburbs and they sleep well at night. But I also think about the ones who are in the inner city who have to dodge bullets on their way to school. And so when you think in terms of the disinherited in this text or in this context, those individuals who don't have voice, who don't have language, as stated before, who, as the book would say, those who have their backs against the wall. I don't want to go too far. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Cedric, Dr. Williams, I'm sorry. Do you want to chime in on this question?
Yeah, you can call me Cedric too. That works, Trey. We'll keep it simple and plain. But I would just want to echo that too, as far as the disinherited. I think about in terms of that phrase that Thurman says of living with your backs against the wall and really feeling cornered. And I think that even as Will said, like, my family is from the south side of Chicago, and I didn't grow up there. I grew up in the cornfield, in the middle of a cornfield in a place called Normal, Illinois. And when I say cross-cultural context of living with both my parents from the projects on the south side, and me growing up in a very what I would say predominantly white space, this feeling of cornered for me, I think that and disinherited. I've not only felt that, as a child, but also in my own family too, right? And so I think that it's nuanced, but the experience of youth, Black youth, BIPOC youth, of feeling disinherited, I think it's multidimensional, and it happens in different ways and in different settings. So not only as far as physical dangers, but even academic or in educational settings with school discipline and things like that. In a ministry context, which Ahren had mentioned it earlier. So I think that for anyone who's feeling cornered, I think that this idea of disinherited has a lot of relevance.
Thank you all. I would love to hear, based on your experience, what are some of the ways that people can effectively partner with, advocate, and empower young people today?
Leaders smell like sheep. And when you are so far ahead or above that you don't smell like the young people, you can't touch them. One of my favorite quotes is by John Maxwell, who says, "You must first connect before you direct." And in order for you to have the attention of these young people, you've got to connect in real ways. And also, I had an awesome time yesterday with Dr. Taylor, who made a statement that says, sometimes you get stuck, and this is not the direct quote, but sometimes you get stuck in this ideal of progression, but never being committed to the work of progression. And so to connect with young people in real ways, you got to connect with them.
That's a word, Will. The whole word. All of that. And also, just to add to what Will said, we really need to slow down. We need to slow down a lot. A lot. A whole lot. Yeah. I really think when it comes to our ministries and things, we focus on so much programming and what event can we do and what can we do for this and what can we do for that, and are we doing this right, and do we get the youth involved in this? But and I think the youth really want to know, they want us to listen to us, first of all, to listen to what their needs are, what they're experiencing, what they're going through, what are their actual needs, and then see how we can form our events or services or what have you around what they want, not incorporating them into our very adult way of doing things and our very structured way of doing things, because it's comfortable. But we really have to get uncomfortable in those spaces to really try and restructure what we do around what it is that they need and incorporating them into the conversation regularly, not just once a month or around like, well, this Sunday we'll do that and then maybe we'll follow up next quarter. Like having them be a part of the conversation on the regular so that they feel included and so that they know their voice matters, not just once a month, but consistently. So I think it's about really getting uncomfortable and changing the way that we do things and slowing down, because I think we can get so caught up in what are we doing here, what are we doing there, and what about next year? But like, where are we right now and how can we be present within that? Yeah.
Just want to follow up on that, Ahren. What are some practical ways in your context you've helped create space to slow down the pace?
That's a good question. It can be really hard to slow things down. especially on your own, you know. But I think something that I try to do is encourage spaces, safe spaces for youth to just speak on what they need and what they want and what's necessary for them, and whether that be just with people of color, just with the youth leaders, whatever makes them feel the most comfortable, creating those spaces for them. And even if they just want to be quiet or just crack some jokes or something, that's fine. But at least it's slow. Like, at least we're slowing down, and we're not talking about curriculum or strategy or like all of those things that youth can get like, well, what is your strategy? They're like, well, what do you even mean by that? I know our youth, at All Saints, we have our values that we have, and I know our youth have gone through like strategic development and talked about those things. And a few of our youth have said, these words don't even make sense to us. Like, why are you even putting these words together? Like, can you just define what that means? Why is it so wordy? Like, that's how simple it is. Like, let's just talk about what you guys want. What do these words mean to you? And how do we switch it up? You know, that kind of slowing down, I think. Yeah.
Can I add to that? Slowing down also may feel uncomfortable for you,
Yeah.
because you have to embed yourself into their world.
Exactly.
So when you learn how to put your agenda to the side and immerse yourself into their agenda,
Right.
slowing down looks like that.
That's good.
And if I could just add one more thing, so the caring adult piece, which I think is just a repetition of what you guys have already said, but my brother earlier mentioned the table. And when I think about a practice of slowing down, I think just inviting young people around the table to literally eat with families and be able to, it just gives the space to kind of listen and to hear and to embed yourself in their worlds in a very informal kind of way. And so I think that's one way that I've seen work in regard to at least being able to demonstrate care and an ear. And that opens up to practice other kind of practices that you can become a bridge to access, give them access for things that they might need.
Yeah, I just to add to what Dr. Farmer said, the phrase that came up for me was just this idea of intergenerational healing. And I think that if we're focusing in on students and the youth in order to encourage them to heal, we also have to look at ourselves as being positions who are actually, in that case, are in positions of power to actually influence that as well. And so I think that there's a modeling aspect that has to happen as an older generation of how can we model healing? How can we invite people to the table? And even this week, I was reading a book that was published through Fuller Youth Institute with Sticky Faith for Families. And I can remember, shout out for that book. But there was a chapter and it was talking about how to get your kids to open up about their narrative of God and walking with God. And part of it was just like a simple practical thing was that you have to tell your story too. Right. So it's not just about asking and probing children to say, hey, come on, do this. It's also inviting because you're being collaborative with them. It's not something that you're telling them to do. It's also something that you're doing, you're gathering and we're doing this together. So I think that that's also, as Will said about, being at the table, like there has to be space at the table and it has to be reciprocal, not unilateral and one directional.
And not transactional either, because I think sometimes in our ministries, we can be very transactional. We have a goal in mind and we engage with youth, for that purpose. And I think young people can smell it, like they know when we're being transactional. And I mean, like my sister said, the slowing down means, relationships take time. They require something of us. They require that discomfort. But it can't be transactional.
Yes, that was so good. Just to add on to that, Dr. Williams was talking about just like talking and telling our stories, and to plug another FYI resource. I co-authored a guide with Jennifer Guerra Aldana in this room and Kat Armas. Yes, over here. Yes, talking. Whoop, whoop, my sister. Yes, it's over here. Jen's over here. about how to talk about race with teenagers and culture, power, and immigration. And something we talk about heavily is storytelling and the importance of that with young people and telling the stories, our stories of how we grew up and our struggles and what we go through. And just really modeling that vulnerability for them, I think can be really empowering for them to tell their own stories. But we have to model that first for them. But to go to those spaces where we are uncomfortable and to just really be vulnerable with them in those ways so that they're like, oh, they're doing that. That feels good. That can just be a really healing experience for them to just do consistently so that they're able to know that they're not alone. You understand them that much more so. And that can just be a really empowering space too.
Thank you, thank you. I want to pivot in a different direction. Yesterday, as part of the celebration, Dr. Brenda Salter McNeil and Dr. David Goatley, our new president, talked about the importance of questions. And we don't have young people physically present here with us right now, but I'm curious, what are some of the questions that young people in your context who you serve with are asking right now?
Well, since we're plugging FYI products, we recently launched a devotional, 3 Big Questions That Shape Your Future. And that's a teen devotional that really walks teens through identity, purpose, and belonging. I think I said that backwards, but same 3. But even in that, the questions, one thing in my adult life that I realized, sometimes you don't even know the questions to ask until you're in the room. And so one of the things, in order to begin to think in terms of questions, you have to think of exposure. What are we exposing our young people to? What rooms are they in so that they can know how to ask the questions? Just this past weekend, I was at a conference in Vegas, and I didn't gamble, y'all. I didn't gamble. I didn't do it. I didn't do it. I was there and amongst so many leaders, amongst so many entrepreneurs, and I was so blown away by the concepts of what they just had as the individuals in their companies. And I'm just like, I didn't even ask myself that question in my company. Like, what do we? And so exposure allows our young people to explore. It allows them to discover. And it allows them to present themselves and to present to us the questions that may open up in those settings.
Yeah, I can jump in here. I had probably the most impactful question that has been asked, I guess, recently. And I say recently, within the last 5 to 7 years. I was in psychotherapy and talking with a client, and this client, Black male, were both, Black men in psychotherapy, which is a whole nother topic, right, that I would love to unpack at a different time. But sitting there, this person in particular, he asked this question because he was wrestling about his identity of what he should do. The further that he got on with his education and got accepted into colleges and pursued colleges, he felt farther and farther away from his people. He defined it as his people. And he asked me this question. He says, am I Black like you, or are you Black like me? Mm-hmm. And I was really struck by that question, right? And I think what the root of it is, it's an identity, right? It's an identity dilemma. And I think that when you are cornered and you're disinherited, you feel like you have to choose. Yeah. Like, am I Black? Am I Black enough? Or do I have to be a part of this in order to fit in to the disinherited? So, I mean, it's so multi-layered. And I think about so many people who sit at that seat and ask that similar questions, but it's really about identity development and formation. So I think that right now, we as people who are in positions of power and influence with our youth have to be continually mindful of how do we allow people to say, you are a part of us by the very nature of being, right? So that whole idea of what am I, who am I, like that is not just something that's an external question that can be answered. That also is an internal question that must be answered, right? Vertically, not necessarily just horizontally, interpersonally. So those are the types of things that I feel like students are continually wrestling with in a world where, it's easily to point and to say, to being pulled in different directions. So I'll stop there, but.
Dr. Farmer, Ahren, you want to respond to that question? No pressure. You don't have to.
I mean, the only thing I'll add, and once again, I think the three big questions that Fuller kind of identifies, identity, purpose, belonging, are the big pertinent questions that young people are asking within their context, right? But I think the other question that can fall in any of these, identity, purpose, but I feel like they're always asking us for permission, just like similar to what Dr. Williams said, like permission to be who they are, permission to become who they want to be, not who their parents want them to be, not who society has told them they should be, but just permission to create their own spaces, permission to be in places that, permission to be in a church. I mean, I think they're as they are, but I think they're, and I don't think they always ask the question outright, but sometimes I think they ask it in the way they behave as well. That's what I'll add.
That's good. Go ahead. That's really good. Yes, all of that. Dr. Williams, you brought up something that I've actually can really relate to and have experienced a lot of conversations lately around the kind of the choosing of, especially I presented recently, I think it was last year actually, for at CCDA with a friend and a former colleague from FYI, Jane Hong Guzman de Leon, on talking about race throughout the generations and intergenerational conversations and relationships and those things. And we talked about, again, storytelling and the importance of knowing our ancestors and who we are and where we came from in order to give us purpose, which can give us purpose in order to kind of tell us where we're going, but to also learn just about our family lines. And something that I talked about within my own story was having to kind of do my own research in my Black home about my African ancestry. And I think that there can be, there's a disconnect there for African American people in this, this double consciousness, right, that W.E.B. Du Bois talks about, right, about being African, but also being American in this land, but also having to do the work of researching, where you came from Africa. Do you even want to do that? Is that even something that you're interested in, But I realized that I needed to do that work, and it was important to me because of where I came from and just knowing more about myself and my family. And there was a few Black women, young Black women, that came up to me that said that, thank you for telling us about that, because we also had that same experience and could not relate being in the Black community to. They're like, I didn't feel as Black as the other Black people around me. And she said, I didn't know that was a common understanding or a common experience. And they actually had immigrant parents that have come over from different parts of Africa that actively did not want them to research or to do the work of researching where they came from, because they're, you're in America, you're American, like just stop there, and there's a lot of pain in that conversation. But they said, but I want to know. So there was so much empowerment in that conversation. I'm like, girl, you look up where you came from, you do that research, but the question of, is it okay to even try to find out?
Wow.
Is it okay to do that research? Is it okay to ask the question? Because oftentimes in our homes, it's not, so kind of that around identity, right? It's all around identity, but just wanting to know more. And is it okay to do that? Because what I'm feeling in my body does not feel like I feel like it should feel, if that makes sense.
Thank you, thank you. We're going to open it up in a second for questions from people here who are with us physically, as well as people who are watching online. But I want to ask one more question. Obviously, we're talking about the issues, the challenges, the difficulties that disinherited youth face and experience. But I'm also aware that there's a lot of wealth. Dr. Robert Chow Romero talks about community cultural wealth. Not just having a deficit model as we look at particular communities, but how can we celebrate the wealth that particular communities, and in this case, young people bring? What is some of the wealth that you think young people offer to the church?
That's good. Ooh, how much time we got?
Oh, yeah. I think young people are innovative, creative. I think they're fearless in ways that sometimes when you have gotten things, you have another level of fear you experience that sometimes young people don't have. I think they have a sense of vision, and I think they have a courage sometimes that we don't have.
Yeah, I would agree with Dr. Farmer. I think that, young people now, I mean, they always have been very innovative, and I think that they're asking questions that help us to not only see ourselves, but to see others differently, right? I think Black youth in particular, asking questions about LGBTQ community that I think are really important. They're really important for the church to answer those questions, specifically the Black church and Black community. I think that their courage is going to be very important of not just asking who am I, but who are they? And what do you think about those others, right? And that's going back to that Dr. Thurman's point where he was talking about being on the bus and the train and looking out and seeing two white children and a Black family was on the two Black girls were on the bus or the train with him and said, well, what would happen if they fall, right? And he basically just was, kind of in some ways gave a reprimand to say like, well, we need to be thinking about other people too, right? And I think that there is something about the youth these days that are so also not only looking at the way that you treat me, but how you treat others. Right? That is different. And that is important. And I love the idea of what you're saying, Trey, about, it's not necessarily from a deficit model because being Black is not an issue, right? Racism is an issue. Being Black is not a barrier, right? Racism is a barrier, right? Prejudice is a barrier. And I think that our youth are seeing that more and more, but those cultural identities, not just with ethnicity or race, they're asking that about a lot of different cultural identities as well. And so I think that is going to continually press us into more challenging conversations that are needed and necessary, which obviously I think that strengthens the entire body overall.
I think about, for 7 years, I worked for an organization out of Jamaica, out of Chicago, but we did work in Jamaica, providing health equipment for hospitals and clinics there. And I remember one trip there, I was there with, I had our CEO's son, his name is Kirk Kelly. Kirk Kelly's with me, and I have my camera, and I'm taking different shots of Black River, Jamaica. There's nothing touristy about Black River, Jamaica. And we're down there, and Kirk kept saying, hey, Will, can I take a picture? And I'm like, no, like this camera costs too much, boy. If you drop my camera, we'll have some problems. And Kurt said, oh man, I really wish I can take us a few pictures. And I kept telling him no, and I kept telling him no, until finally I said, Kurt Kelly, don't you drop my camera. And I gave my camera to Kurt. And when I tell you that kid captured some amazing photos, for the rest of the trip, I said, you're the photographer. We can celebrate the wealth of our young people by just giving them a chance. If we learn how to, there's one lady, she once told me, she said, Will, you have to learn how to put your car in neutral, take your hands take your foot off the brake, take your hands off the steering wheel, and just ride through the car wash. So many times as leaders and adults, we want so much control. But if you give them a chance, they will launch your ministry, launch your business, launch but they need a chance. So I say, celebrate the wealth, like give them a chance.
Ooh, yeah, yeah, yeah. All of that. Oof, all of that. Yeah, I feel like all of what they said was so, all of that. I think my only thing, and I think I'm just going to echo what they said, honestly, is just to young people ask the best questions. They do. They ask the simplest ones that are so profound, even when it comes to language and like, what does that even mean? Why are you guys using this language together? Why simplify it? What does it all mean? And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly right. You know? So just really listening to their questions and what they need, I think, and the most powerful things that I think young people do is they reframe everything. Like they teach us how to do things in just such new and beautiful ways that you would never think to do that way. Like I've had my youth teach me different ways to pray that I never thought about, even just through dance, like prayer being a dance. What does prayer look like in your life outside of just folding your hands and bowing your head? You know, like just really beautiful. Go to the tree, exactly. Like all the things, like they just teach us beautiful new ways to do life and to do church and just to do everyday things. And I think that needs to be taken seriously, and it needs to, you know, be the way that we do things. Help us reframe according to your perspective. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, we want to open it up now for questions for those who are online as well as those who are physically with us. And we'll start online. And so if we can go to the questions online. Kayla, yeah. So we will pivot to the questions in the room.
This gentleman.
It might be helpful to use the mic, or
What we're going to do is after she asks the question,
I'll repeat it.
just paraphrase the question.
Okay. So how do you go about growing/restoring youth ministries when people have stopped showing up?
So the question is, how do you go about growing and supporting, developing youth ministries when people have stopped showing up?
You go to FYI. And you invite, there's Growing Young, there's Sticky Faith. No, seriously, to the person online, go to FullerYouthInstitute.com or .org, and I'm the marketing manager. I'm gonna call you back. But seriously, go there. We have a host of resources that will help you and aid you, because that's a deeper conversation. But I'll let you guys. I just want to plug FYI. God bless you.
God bless you. That's really good. I think oftentimes, especially with youth ministry, I feel like churches can be so compartmentalized into youth ministry is here, the food ministry is here, the singers are here, and that's where we stay, right? And I think when people stop showing up, and I'd immediately think of like volunteers or whatever that may look like in terms of like when you're just on your own. I think it's really important to pull other people from church, from the staff, from the clergy, everybody to come in and help, because I feel like it often happens that they can handle it. The youth staff's got it. And so we're going to focus on our other things. Honestly, it shouldn't just be when people stop showing up. They should all be incorporated within youth ministry and what you're doing with the youth all the time. They need to see those faces. They need to see the faces, not that are working with them every day, but the people that are up in the pulpit, the people that are doing the sermons, like they need to see those faces consistently, not just on special days or other things like that. But I think that's when it's time to really start pulling in everyone, like all hands on deck, clergy and everyone, to really get hands-on with the youth and to show them that they're loved, because youth they notice when volunteers don't come. You know, they love and they know those faces. You know, they look forward to them, but they know when they stop coming, and even if they don't tell us, they show it, just like Dr. Farmer was saying, through their actions or the way they behave. You know, you feel that void. So I think it's important for the church folks, families, people to show up and show out for those youth, and for them to know that they're loved and they're cared for, and that people will always show up for them, you know.
And I just want to jump into. I'm not a youth pastor. I'm not in that work. I mean, I was a college pastor for 5 years, but I would even reframe the question too in some way of if youth are not showing up, I'm like, where are they supposed to show up to? Are they not showing up to a building? Because that's not church, right? So I would think about what Ahren was saying about just this idea of how can you show up? How are we as a community showing up for youth, whether it be through our schools, whether it be through community projects, whether it be through being a hall monitor, volunteering at the schools where they're just around, being their coaches, being their basketball coaches, being their baseball coaches, being their softball coaches or cheerleading coaches or whatever it may be. And I come from a more of a grew up in Young Life, and that was something that like heavily influenced my development and understanding of who Jesus was. And I think that there is something about that relational ministry that's important. And so being able to not necessarily wait, but being able to go towards others reminds me of that passage in Thessalonians. So it's like, we loved you so much that not only did we share the gospel of Jesus, but we also shared our lives as well. And I think part of sharing your life is actually going to them and not necessarily waiting for them to come to some sort of building, because I think it's more complex than that.
That's a good word. Let's go ahead and transition to any questions from people here physically with us. Is that John? John, you want to stand up and offer your question? And I'll do my best to share it.
Thank you very much. A question to Dr. Wilson about the mental health consequences of disinherited. Both what you have experienced in your practice, but also research that is coming out in the last few years about that subject in your particular field. And I speak because my day job is as a medical researcher, and we're slowly catching up with Thurman's points about the effects on the body of disinheritance. And we know about adverse child events and the effects that they will have over a lifespan, and also the biophysical effects of chronic stress and how it affects the body. But I'm not so up to date with the mental health consequences of disinherited. And I think it would be quite useful just to hear a few words about that, because science has proven that this is real. What we knew from our experience has been discovered scientifically at last.
Thanks for that question, John. So the question for you, Dr. Williams, is what are some of the mental health consequences of the issues that the disinherited face? So that's a brief summation of the question.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't hear the comment or the question from the gentleman, but I can jump in. I think that, as far as mental health goes and the problems and some of the concerns that people are coming in, I think it's the number one thing that I spoke about it earlier, which is identity, like a crisis of identity of who am I? And when you are continually bombarded with microaggressions on a daily basis, microaggressions from individuals, you're on the outs of society. You're seen as a problem. You're seen as an issue that has to be worked or a vote to be won. This is problematic. I think that this is problematic when it comes to identity. And so I think that the way that it manifests in psychotherapy is questions related to who am I, interpersonal conflict, intrapersonal conflict with self, right? That's coming out in ways that we interact with other people interpersonally. I think that there is a pervasive sense of anxiety. So as Thurman's talking about it, he uses the word of fear, but fear is rooted in that anxiety, right? Anxiety of just being able to live like people. We just want to live like everyone else, right? And students, youth, they're in that same asking those same questions and facing those types of problems that are rooted in anxiety, rooted in that fear, rooted in isolation. I think that we, in this digital world, there's lots of great things from technology, but we are incredibly connected digitally and incredibly disconnected from others as well. And so I think that those types of issues are going to manifest in the they do manifest themselves in psychotherapy. And I think that that's one of the concerns. I think that there's a lot more, but I'll stop right there and wait for any kind of questions or follow-up from that.
Thank you for that. We can go now. Are there any other questions online?
Yes, I do have one. So what is the message of hope we can offer to the up and coming generation in light of what Dr. Brenda Salter McNeil talked about yesterday? Our nation is divided theologically, politically, generationally, etc. What are the questions we need to ask ourselves to serve today's youth, and what hope can we offer to them that the church is still relevant?
I don't think I need to repeat the question because she used the mic, so.
Jesus. Can we do that? Can we lead them to Jesus? Andy told me to do that. But seriously, isn't possible. I tell people this all the time. We read the scriptures, but I question if we believe the scriptures. I am not a theologian, but the Bible says, what the scripture says, if my people who are called by my name humble themselves and pray, seek my face, turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and heal their land. And I feel like we fail to go back to prayer, because anytime you can drive past with peace trauma, do you got Jesus? I'll go back to Jamaica very quickly. I was in Jamaica at the grocery store, and I'm getting ready to check out. And the Lord says, pay for the lady's stuff behind you. And I'm like, no, I got this much in American money. I got this much in Jamaican money. Can't do it today. I'm gonna call you back, God. And I'm starting to walk out of the grocery store, and the Lord said, be obedient. I turn around, I give the lady the money. I said, God bless you. Have a great day. I go out. An hour later, I see this lady on the other side of town, and she says, you work for Jesus! You work for Jesus! She's crying with her bags in her hand, and she says, when I left home, the Lord told me I was going to feed my family. And she said, I was next in line to pay for my stuff with no money. But the Lord told me that I was going to feed my family. She said, you were the one. So if we can get to a place where we have the heart of Jesus and lay our issues, our prize, I'm gonna call you back, God. No. Why are you praying God bless them when he blessed you to be the blessing? Sorry, I'm a youth pastor at a black church. But seriously, so many times we see the events and we say, oh Lord, bless them. Oh Lord, do that. Where I'm at in my life now, I'm praying, Lord, raise me up so that I can be the blessing that they're praying for. And so many of us are in places and in spaces where we have the answers and the resources, but we won't give it. But we say we love Jesus.
I'm going to agree with my brother on that. I think Jesus, that is not a simplistic answer, because I think that's really part of what Howard Thurman, right, is he's offering Jesus. And I think that part of what we have to do, unfortunately, is start to give them, like, I don't want to say heal, but there's so much baggage of how Jesus and God has been presented to young people. Part of it is helping them see who the Jesus of the Bible, who this Jesus is. And so that they don't have a distorted view of Jesus that's kind of conflated with political views and conflated with these ideologies that have kind of driven our ways of being and our ways of acting, but to reintroduce our young people to Jesus and the power that Jesus has. That power is also theirs. That authority is also theirs, and there is hope, I think, in that.
Go for it, Ahren.
Yeah, ooh, amen to what both to what both of y'all have said. And just to add on to what both Will and Dr. Farmer said, I think it's in being the hands and feet, just like Dr. Farmer was talking about, just reintroducing them to who Jesus is, being truly the hands and feet of God in their lives and just in your daily life, and letting it be okay for them to ask questions about who God is and seeing God in different ways, and because I didn't have that. I wasn't made okay to ask questions about who God is and even just how do we refer to her or him, whatever. Like it's okay to do those things. And I think those things give us hope, that gives them hope, that God is not a linear, one-dimensional God. So we can't even understand all of it. And it's okay for them. And that, I feel like that is so much hope in that too.
Thank you. We're going to begin to near the end of our panel, but we have time for at least one more question. If anyone here in the room has a question, Dr. Abernethy.
I just want to thank you. This has been so enlightening. I appreciate the comments and insights. I'm actually bringing a question from Dr. Myung Yoon Hammer, the chair of our MFT program. When we teach our MFT students about working with children and adolescents in therapy, we say they are doing preventive work and that they must learn to work with parents and families. Child and adolescent therapy requires understanding the broader family system. Here's the question. How have you included parents and/or extended family to be part of the ministry work you're doing with kids?
So in my work, even in my title, it's like children, youth, and family programming. That's what I do. I think of different ways truly to do that exact thing. How do we incorporate families into our work with young people and just really make it a circular event, and the importance of that, because we're a village. And I truly believe in the village mentality. I mean, that is African culture, that is African tradition. We all raise up our youth together. We have different events and things and stuff that we do to incorporate the kids and the families together. But I think the most beautiful thing that I have seen is to just be on the playground, and not just with little people, with big ones too, like teenagers and everybody, and just have the family and the kids and the teenagers together, just having a conversation. Like, let's have some coffee and donuts and just chill and talk. And let's have the teenagers play on the jungle gym or whatever with the young people, or just by themselves. Because I think that we want to take the play out of that so much. Parents are here, kids are here, teenagers are here. And yet we forget about the joy that we need to cultivate within our families, within our villages, and the importance of that. And it seems so simple, yet it's so profound in incorporating the joy within our families and within our young people. So I think really just creating spaces of joy and just simple stuff to bring everybody together. It doesn't have to be structured. It doesn't have to be scripted. This is what we're going to do. We got an agenda. No, let's get some food. Like Dr. Farmer said, that food is truly the great equalizer and brings everybody together. Let's get some food and let's just hang out together and talk. And, you know, whatever comes up, we all have something to learn from each other. But I've found that that is the best, some of the best and most beautiful ways to have intergenerational connection and circular relationship is bringing everyone together in those simple yet profound ways with food.
One more person want to respond to that question?
I'd be happy to jump in and kind of talk from even from a psychological or psychotherapy perspective. One, I would just say that Western psychologies and psychotherapy, you know, for, I don't know, the last 100 years, you know, in this modality, if you come in once a week for 1 hour and meet with an individual, there's a psychologist and marriage and family therapist, Dr. Pamela Hayes, who talks specifically about working with different cultural identities, specifically Black culture, that's not necessarily the way that other cultural identities work, right? So thinking about how can you have more wraparound, more comprehensive ways to connect, that might be bringing in some of the priests of their society, which could be their pastor, which could be their teacher, a part of that treatment, a part of that, and looking at more of a systemic component of not just working with the individual and treating the individual, but looking at the entire system and actually making interventions that are wraparound, not just, you know, 50 minutes with an individual, a child or a youth, but working with the family, working with the pastors, working with their coaches, of course, within the context and the liability of psychotherapy. But sometimes I think that when we just focused in on the liability and we kind of play not to lose instead of, you know, to win and actually help somebody. And so I think that thinking outside of the box and broadening our perspective of who and how we can be the most helpful to the clients that we're serving is important. And that's what I would say to that question, because I do think that it's important that we don't just hyper focus in on just looking at an individual and thinking that 50 minutes once a week is the only way that brings about change in an individual's life. It's looking at the entire system and working with that.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. To wrap up our panel, I want to offer each of our panelists just about a 30, 45-second final statement, anything you want to share that you haven't shared that you'd like to offer to those watching online and those with us. So take about a minute for a final statement.
I would say do life together. As we continue to move forward in life and sharing with others, community is so important. And so creating a healthy community for yourself and for others, and especially for our young people, will really get us to a place where we will all be able to have milk and honey.
I would say don't let your fear of young people override what you have to offer them and what they have to offer you. I think our young people are a worthy investment, and you find that you yourself are changed when you're in relationship with young people.
Yeah, I would just say as a community, as a faith community, as a church community, I'm reminded of Matthew 16 when it talks about Jesus was in Caesarea Philippi and talking about the gates of hell will not prevail. I think that sometimes we read that in a very defensive position, but not necessarily on the offensive. So I think that if we can just kind of think of us as moving towards and not necessarily trying to hold the world or youth at bay, but allow people just to be released and explore and to be free in that, and not coming from a defensive, whether it be a defensive theology perspective or mindset, but allow people just to encourage and grow and be innovative and creative with them.
Yeah, I would just say truly love on your young people. Love on your young people. Listen to them. They are our future. Invest in them in every way you can. There's so many levels to that, but invest in them. And I want to shout out real quick some incredible, amazing individuals. I would not be where I am today if it weren't for Fuller and FYI and the amazing professors here that are doing such great work with young people and educating people about young people. And that's Dr. Argue, Dr. Scott, Dr. Johnny Ramirez Johnson, and Dr. McConnell as well. I'm just gonna try to get through this without crying. I can't do it. But the amazing work being done here, educating us about the best ways to help young people. It's just so good. So thank you.